Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones you can't solve right now, and will be easier to solve while rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? What is this strange thing, this strange idea, this podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to? Lack of sleep is a health crisis in the 21st century, and this is a podcast intended to help those that it can to get a restful night. Do you find yourself lying awake at night, mind spinning and emotions in turmoil with anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m. I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. Sleepy Time Tales is intended to be used as a distraction to what keeps you awake at night, or sometimes background noise or simply company. That's why I make the episodes quite long, so that I'm here for you, without any pressure of the end coming. As far as I know, there are a couple of different ways to engage with the show. The primary idea is that it gives you something to focus on, a story or an event that lets you keep your mind on a specific point, to stop it from spinning out into stress and anxieties, to focus just enough not to resist the embrace of a night's sleep. But maybe you need something a bit different. Maybe just need some kind of background noise. Some people like white noise, some like the ocean, some like the wind in the trees, and some maybe just need a boring dude droning on in the background. As you're listening, don't force sleep. Keep a light mental grip on my voice, on the thread of the story, and allow the need for sleep to come for you. Now, obviously, I'm hoping that you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode, but don't feel pressurized. It may not work on the first night. It will probably take at least 2 nights, probably 3, for you to get used to listening to my voice. Or maybe my accent is strange to you, or maybe 1 episode isn't long enough. Or maybe your problem isn't even so much going to sleep. Maybe you find yourself waking up in the middle of the night. What I recommend is that you let the podcast run all night. Download a whole bunch of episodes, put them in a playlist, and when you go to bed, start on the latest and let them go. That way, if you find yourself awake at 3 a.m., you can just carry on listening and go straight back to sleep again. You can even do the same thing if you habitually wake up before the alarm. 60 minutes or as little as 30 minutes. Do the same, get yourself a few extra 40 winks. And you may wonder what the point of that is. What's an extra 60 minutes or 30 minutes of sleep worth? But I've had people actually thank me for suggesting this to them, because there's something about allowing yourself complete relaxation right before the alarm that's satisfying on a whole new, deep level. But as you're listening, just relax. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying, staring at the ceiling, this will seem strange to you. So just give it a chance. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, I'll chat again soon. And of course you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. Before we get on with the show, I'd like to ask for a couple of minutes of your time. If you'd like to support Sleepy Time Tales to help me keep it going out to thousands of insomniacs just like you, please consider supporting it on the Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. This is monthly support that not only helps me keep the lights on, but gets you fun bonuses based on your contribution level. From $2 a month, you get early access to the weekly episodes, and $5 a month gets you bonus minisodes, special edits, and a monthly megasode. And support has fallen off in the last couple of months as listenership has actually grown quite a lot. So if there's anyone newer to the show or who has been sitting on the fence for a while, now is a great time to sign up and it would be much appreciated. But if monthly support is a little bit much to ask for, and I understand that completely, you can make once-off tips through the tip jar on the website. Shoutouts to my newest patron, Charity, who signed up a couple of days ago. Thank you so much to you, Charity, for your support. I'm grateful, and I'm glad that you find the show worth supporting. Another huge way to help the show is simply to spread the word. As I said, listenership has gone up, and that really is very helpful. And by spreading the word, you are helping other people to improve their lives. If you tell people on social media, please make sure to tag me in at Sleepytime Tales on Instagram or Twitter, so that I can see and I can thank you. Folks who follow me on Patreon or on social media may have noticed that I released the very short little piece of interstitial music that I've made for the show, starting from episode 200. So if you're curious what that's going to sound like, you can find it up on the Patreon, but it is available for free to everybody. And you can also find it through the show's social media as well. And for the last time, I'd like to shout out the music, which is Sweet Night and Friends by Kumiko. The music is available on their website at loyaltyfreakmusic.com. Their stuff is extremely cool, and I'm also very grateful that they make their work available for free to so many people. Thanks for taking the time. Let's get back to the show. Return this week to The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus by L. Frank Baum. The First Journey with the Reindeer. Those were happy days for Claus when he carried his accumulation of toys to the children who had awaited them so long. During his imprisonment in the valley, he had been so industrious that all his shelves were filled with playthings. And after quickly supplying the little ones living nearby, he saw he must now extend his travels to wider fields. Remembering the time when he had journeyed with Ak through all the world, he knew children were everywhere, and he longed to make as many as possible happy with his gifts. So he loaded a great sack with all kinds of toys, slung it upon his back that he might carry it more easily, and started off on a longer trip than he had yet undertaken. Wherever he showed his merry face, in hamlet or in farmhouse, he received a cordial welcome, for his fame had spread into far lands. At each village the children swarmed about him, following his footsteps wherever he went, and the women thanked him gratefully for the joy he brought their little ones. And the men looked upon him curiously that he should devote his time to such a queer occupation as toy-making. But everyone smiled on him and gave him kindly words, and Claus felt amply repaid for his long journey. When the sack was empty, he went back again to the Laughing Valley, and once more filled it to the brim. This time he followed another road, into a different part of the country, and carried happiness to many children who never before had owned a toy, or guessed that such a delightful plaything existed. After a third journey, so far away that Claus was many days walking the distance, the store of toys became exhausted, and without delay he set about making a fresh supply. From seeing so many children and studying their tastes, he had acquired several new ideas about toys. The dollies were, he had found, the most delightful of all playthings for babies and little girls. And often those who could not say dolly would call for a doll in their sweet baby talk. So Claus resolved to make many dolls, of all sizes, and to dress them in bright-colored clothing. The older boys, and even some of the girls, loved the images of animals, so he still made cats and elephants and horses. And many of the little fellows had musical natures, and longed for drums and cymbals, and whistles and horns. So he made a number of toy drums, with tiny sticks to beat them with, and he made whistles from the willow trees, and horns from the bog reeds, and cymbals from bits of beaten metal. All this kept him busily at work, and before he realized it, the winter season came, with deeper snows than usual, and he knew he could not leave the valley with his heavy pack. Moreover, the next trip would take him further from home than ever before, and Jack Frost was mischievous enough to nip his nose and ears if he undertook the long journey while the Frost King reigned. The Frost King was Jack's father, and never reproved him for his pranks. So Claus remained at his workbench, but he whistled and sang as merrily as ever, for he would allow no disappointment to sour his temper or make him unhappy. One bright morning he looked from his window and saw 2 of the deer he had known in the forest walking towards his house. Claus was surprised. Not that the friendly deer should visit him, but that they walked on the surface of the snow as easily as if it were solid ground, notwithstanding the fact that throughout the valley the snow lay many feet deep. He had walked out of his house a day or 2 before and had sunk to his armpits in a drift. So when the deer came near, he opened the door and called to them, "Good morning, Flossie. Tell me how you are able to walk on the snow so easily." "It is frozen hard," answered Flossie. "The Frost King has breathed on it," said Glossie, coming up, "and the surface is now as solid as ice." "Perhaps," remarked Claus thoughtfully, "that I might now carry my pack of toys to the children." "Is it a long journey?" asked Flossie. "Yes, it will take me many days, for the pack is heavy," answered Claus. "Then the snow would melt before you get back," said the deer. "You must wait until spring, Claus." Claus sighed. "Had I your fleet feet," said he, "I could make the journey in a day." "But you have not," returned Glossie, looking at his own slender legs with pride. "Perhaps I could ride on your back?" Claus ventured to remark after a pause. "Oh no, our backs are not strong enough to bear your weight," said Flossie decidedly. "But if you had a sledge and could harness us to it, we might draw you easily, and your pack as well." "I'll make a sledge," exclaimed Claus. "Will you agree to draw me if I do?" "Well," replied Flossie, "we must go first and ask the Knooks, or our guardians, for permission. But if they consent, you can make a sledge and harness, and we will gladly assist you." "Then go at once," cried Claus eagerly. "I am sure the friendly Knooks will give their consent, and by the time you are back I shall be ready to harness you to my sledge." Flossie and Glossie, being deer of much intelligence, had long wished to see the great world, so they gladly ran over the frozen snow to ask the Knooks if they might carry Claus on his journey. Meantime, the toy maker hurriedly began the construction of a sledge, using material from his woodpile. He made 2 long runners that turned upwards at the front ends, and across these nailed short boards to make a platform. It was soon completed, but was as rude in appearance as it is possible for a sledge to be. The harness was more difficult to prepare, but Claus twisted strong cords together and knotted them so they would fit around the necks of the deer, in the shape of a collar. From these ran other cords to fasten the deer to the front of the sledge. Before the work was completed, Glossie and Flossie were back from the forest, having been granted permission by Wolknook to make the journey with Claus, provided they would to Bursey by daybreak the next morning. "That is not a very long time," said Flossie, "but we are swift and strong, and if we get started by this evening we can travel many miles during the night." Claus decided to make the attempt, so he hurried on his preparations as fast as possible. After a time he fastened the collars around the necks of his steeds and harnessed them to his rude sledge. Then he placed a stool on the little platform to serve as a seat, and filled a sack with his prettiest toys. "How do you intend to guide us?" asked Glossie. "We have never been out of the forest before, except to visit your house, so we shall not know the way." Claus thought about that for a moment. Then he brought more cords and fastened 2 of them to the spreading antlers of each deer, one on the right and the other on the left. "Those will be my reins," said Claus, "and when I pull them to the right or to the left, you must go in that direction. If I do not pull the reins at all, you may go straight ahead." "Very well," answered Glossie and Flossie, and then they asked, "Are you ready?" Claus seated himself upon the stool, placed a sack of toys at his feet, and then gathered up the reins. "All ready," he shouted. "Away we go." The deer leaned forward, lifted their slender limbs, and the next moment away flew the sledge over the frozen snow. The swiftness of the motion surprised Claus, for in a few strides they were across the valley and gliding over the broad plain beyond. The day had melted into evening by the time they started, for swiftly as Claus had worked, many hours had been consumed in making his preparations. But the moon shone brightly to light their way, and Claus soon decided it was just as pleasant to travel by night as by day. The deer liked it better, for although they wished to see something of the world, they were timid about meeting men. And now all the dwellers in the towns and farmhouses were sound asleep and could not see them. Away and away they sped, and on over the hills and through the valleys and across the plains until they reached a village where Claus had never been before. Here he called on them to stop, and they immediately obeyed. But a new difficulty now presented itself, for the people had locked their doors when they went to bed, and Claus found he could not enter the houses to leave his toys. "I am afraid, my friends, we have made our journey for nothing," said he, "for I shall be obliged to carry my playthings back home again, without giving them to the children of the village." "What's the matter?" asked Flossie. "The doors are locked," answered Claus, "and I cannot get in." Flossie looked around the house. The snow was quite deep in that village, and just before them was a roof only a few feet above the sledge. A broad chimney, which seemed to Glossie big enough to admit Claus, was at the peak of the roof. "Why don't you climb down that chimney?" asked Glossie. Claus looked at it. That would be easy enough if I were on the top of the roof, he answered. Then hold fast and we will take you there, said the deer. And they gave one bound to the roof and landed beside the big chimney. Good, cried Claus, well pleased. And he slung the pack of toys over his shoulder and got into the chimney. There was plenty of soot on the bricks, but he did not mind that. And by placing his hands and knees against the sides, he crept downward until he had reached the fireplace. Leaping lightly over the smouldering coals, he found himself in a large sitting room, where a dim light was burning. From this room 2 doorways led into smaller chambers. In one a woman lay asleep, with a baby beside her in a crib. Claus laughed, but he did not laugh aloud for fear of waking the baby. Then he slipped a big doll from his pack and laid it in the crib. The little one smiled as if it dreamed of the pretty plaything it was to find on the morrow. And Claus crept softly from the room and entered at the other doorway. Here were 2 boys, fast asleep with their arms around each other's neck. Claus gazed at them lovingly a moment and then placed upon the bed a drum, 2 horns, and a wooden elephant. He did not linger now that his work in this house was done, but climbed the chimney again and seated himself on the sledge. "Can you find another chimney?" he asked the reindeer. "Easily enough," replied Glossie and Flossie. Down to the edge of the roof they raced, and then, without pausing, leapt through the air to the top of the next building, where a huge old-fashioned chimney stood. "Don't be so long this time," called Flossie, "or she'll never get back to the forest by daybreak." Claus made a trip down this chimney also and found 5 children sleeping in the house, all of whom were quickly supplied with toys. When he returned, the deer sprang to the next roof, but on descending the chimney, Claus found no children there at all. That was not often the case in this village, however, so he lost less time than you might suppose in visiting the dreary homes where there were no little ones. When he had climbed down the chimneys of all the houses in that village and left a toy for every sleeping child, Claus found that his great sack was not yet half emptied. "Onward, friends," he called to the reindeer. "We must seek another village." So away they dashed, although it was long past midnight, and in a surprisingly short time they came to a large city, the largest Claus had ever visited since he began to make toys. But nothing daunted by the throng of houses, he set to work at once, and his beautiful steeds carried him rapidly from one roof to another, only the highest being beyond the leaps of the agile deer. At last the supply of toys was exhausted, and Claus seated himself in the sledge, with the empty sack at his feet, and turned the heads of Glossie and Flossie toward home. "What is that grey streak in the sky?" "It is the coming dawn of day," answered Claus, surprised to find that it was so late. "Good gracious," exclaimed Glossie, "then we shall not be home by daybreak, and the Knooks will punish us, and never let us come again." "We must race for the Laughing Valley and make our best speed," returned Flossie. "So hold fast, friend Claus." Claus held fast, and the next moment was flying so swiftly over the snow that he could not see the trees as they whirled past. Uphill and down dale, swift as an arrow shot from a bow they dashed, and Claus shut his eyes to keep the wind out of them and left the deer to find their own way. It seemed to him they were plunging through space, but he was not at all afraid. The Knooks were severe masters and must be obeyed at all hazards, and the grey streak in the sky was growing brighter every moment. Finally, the sledge came to a sudden stop, and Claus, who was taken unawares, tumbled from his seat into a snowdrift. As he picked himself up, he heard the deer crying, "Quick, friend, quick! Cut away our harness." He drew his knife and rapidly severed the cords, and then he wiped the moisture from his eyes and looked around him. The sledge had come to a stop in the Laughing Valley. Only a few feet he found from his own door. In the east the day was breaking, and turning to the edge of Bursey, he saw Glossie and Flossie just disappearing into the forest. Santa Claus. Claus thought that none of the children would ever know where the toys came from, which they found by their bedsides when they wakened the following morning. But kindly deeds are sure to bring fame, and fame has many wings to carry its tidings into far lands. So for miles and miles in every direction, people were talking of Claus and his wonderful gifts to children. The sweet generousness of his work caused a few selfish folk to sneer, but even these were forced to admit their respect for a man so gentle-natured that he loved to devote his life to pleasing the helpless little ones of his race. Therefore the inhabitants of every city and village had been eagerly watching the coming of Claus, and remarkable stories of his beautiful playthings were told the children to keep them patient and contented. When, on the morning following the first trip of Claus with his deer, the little ones came running to their parents with the pretty toys they had found, and asked from whence they came, there was but one reply to the question. "The good Claus must have been here, my darlings, for his are the only toys in all the world." "But how did he get in?" asked the children. At this the fathers shook their heads, being themselves unable to understand how Claus had gained admittance to their homes. But the mothers, watching the glad faces of their dear ones, whispered that the good Claus was no mortal man, but assuredly a saint, and they piously blessed his name for the happiness he had bestowed upon their children. "A saint," said one with bowed head, "has no need to unlock doors if it pleases him to enter our homes." And afterward, when a child was naughty or disobedient, his mother would say, "You must pray to the good Santa Claus for forgiveness. He does not like naughty children, and unless you repent, he will bring you no more pretty toys." But Santa Claus himself would not have approved this speech. He brought toys to the children because they were little and helpless, and because he loved them. He knew that the best of children were sometimes naughty, and that the naughty ones were often good. It is the way with children, the world over, and he would not have changed their natures had he possessed the power to do so. And that is how our Claus became Santa Claus. It is possible for any man, by good deeds, to enshrine himself as a saint in the hearts of the people. Christmas Eve. The day that broke as Claus returned from his night ride with Glossie and Flossie brought him to new trouble. Will Knook, chief guardian of the deer, came to him, surly and ill-tempered, to complain that he had kept Glossie and Flossie beyond daybreak, in opposition to his orders. Yet it could not have been very long after daybreak, said Claus. It was 1 minute after, answered Wolknock, and that is as bad as 1 hour. I shall set the stinging gnats on Glossy and Flossie, and they will thus suffer terribly for their disobedience. Don't do that, begged Claus. It was my fault. But Wolknock would listen to no excuses, and went away grumbling and growling as in his ill-natured way. For this reason Claus entered the forest to consult Necile about rescuing the good deer from punishment. To his delight he found his old friend, the master woodsman, seated in the circle of nymphs. Uck listened to the story of the night journey to the children, and of the great assistance the deer had been to Claus, by drawing his sledge over the frozen snow. I do not wish my friends to be punished if I can save them, said the toy maker, when he had finished the relation. They were only 1 minute late, and they ran swifter than a bird flies to get home before daybreak. Uck stroked his beard thoughtfully a moment, and then sent for the Prince of the Knooks, who rules all his people in Bursey, and also for the Queen of the Fairies and the Prince of the Rolls. When all had assembled, Claus told us a story again at Uck's command, and then the master addressed the Prince of the Knooks, saying, The good work that Claus is doing among mankind deserves the support of every honest immortal. Already he is called a saint in some of the towns, and before long the name of Santa Claus will be lovingly known in every home that is blessed with children. Moreover, he is a son of our forest, so we owe him our encouragement. You, ruler of the Knooks, have known him these many years. Am I not right in saying he deserves our friendship? The prince, crooked and sour of visage as all Knooks are, looked only upon the dead leaves at his feet and muttered, You are the master woodsman of the world. Uck smiled, but continued in soft tones. It seems that the deer which are guarded by your people can be of great assistance to Claus. And as they seem willing to draw his sledge, I beg that you'll permit him to use their services whenever he pleases. The prince did not reply, but tapped the cold point of his sandal with the tip of his spear, as if in thought. Then the fairy queen spoke to him in this way. If you consent to Uck's request, I will see that no harm comes to your deer while they are away from the forest. And the Prince of the Rolls added, For my part, I will allow to every deer that assists Claus the privilege of eating my casa plants which give strength, and my grawl plants which give fleetness of foot, and my marbon plants which give long life. And the Queen of the Nymphs said, The deer which draw the sledge of Claus will be permitted to bathe in the forest pool of Nares, which will give them sleek coats and wonderful beauty. The Prince of the Knooks, hearing these promises, shifted uneasily on his seat, for in his heart he hated to refuse a request of his fellow immortals, although they were asking an unusual favor at his hands, and the Knooks are unaccustomed to granting favors of any kind. Finally he turned to his servants and said, Call Wolknock. When the surly wolf came and heard the demands of the immortals, he protested loudly against granting them. Dear, oh dear, said he, and nothing but deer. Were there horses, it would be right to harness them like horses. But no one harnesses deer because they are free, wild creatures, owing no service of any sort to mankind. It would degrade my dear to labor for Claus. He is only a man, in spite of the friendship lavished on him by the immortals. You have heard, said the prince to Ak. There is truth in what Will says. Call Glossie and Flossie, returned the master. The deer were brought to the conference, and Ak asked them if they objected to drawing the sledge for Claus. No, indeed, replied Glossie. We enjoyed the trip very much. And we tried to get home by daybreak, added Flossie, but were unfortunately a minute too late. A minute lost at daybreak doesn't matter, said Ak. You are forgiven for that day. Provided it does not happen again, said the Prince of the Knooks sternly. And will you permit them to make another journey with me? Asked Claus eagerly. The prince reflected while he gazed at Will, who was scowling, and at the master woodsman, who was smiling. Then he stood up and addressed the company as follows. Since you all urge me to grant the favor, I will permit the deer to go with Claus once every year, on Christmas Eve, provided they always return to the forest by daybreak. He may select any number he pleases up to 10 to draw his sledge, and those shall be known among us as reindeer, to distinguish them from the others. And they shall bathe in the pool of Nares, and eat the casa and grawl and marbon plants, and shall be under their special protection of the fairy queen. And now cease scowling, Will Knook, for my words shall be obeyed. He hobbled quickly away through the trees, to avoid the thanks of Claus and the approval of the other immortals. And Will, looking as cross as ever, followed him. But Ak was satisfied, knowing that he could rely on the promise of the prince, however grudgingly given. And Glossie and Flossie ran home, kicking up the heels delightedly at every step. When is Christmas Eve? Claus asked the master. In about 10 days, he replied. Then I cannot use the deer this year, said Claus thoughtfully, for I shall not have time enough to make my sack full of toys. The shrewd prince foresaw that, responded Ak, and therefore named Christmas Eve as the day you might use the deer, knowing it would cause you to lose an entire year. If only I had the toys the augurs stole from me, said Claus sadly. I could easily fill my sack for the children. Where are they? Asked the master. I do not know, replied Claus, but the wicked augurs probably hid them in the mountains. Can you find them? He asked. I will try, she replied brightly. Then Claus went back to the Laughing Valley, to work as hard as he could, and a band of fairies immediately flew to the mountains that had been haunted by the augurs, and began a search for the stolen toys. The fairies, as we well know, possess wonderful powers. But the cunning augurs had hidden the toys in a deep cave and covered the opening with rocks so no one could look in. Therefore all search for the missing playthings proved in vain for several days. And Claus, who sat at home waiting for news from the fairies, almost despaired of getting the toys before Christmas Eve. He worked hard every moment, but it took considerable time to carve out and to shape each toy and to paint it properly, so that on the morning before Christmas Eve only half of one small shelf above the window was filled with playthings ready for the children. But on this morning the fairies who were searching the mountains had a new thought. They joined hands and moved in a straight line through the rocks that formed the mountain, beginning at the topmost peak and working downward, so that no spot would be missed by their bright eyes. and at last they discovered the cave where the toys had been heaped up by the wicked augurs. It did not take them long to burst open the mouth of the cave, and then each one seized as many toys as he could carry, and they all flew to Claus and laid the treasures before him. The good man was rejoiced to receive, just in the nick of time, such a store of playthings with which to load his shed, and he sent word to Glossie and Flossie to be ready for the journey at nightfall. With all his other labours, he had managed to find time, since the last trip, to repair the harness and to strengthen his sledge, so that when the deer came to him at twilight, he had no difficulty in harnessing them. "We must go in another direction tonight," he told them, "where we shall find children I have never yet visited. And we must travel fast and work quickly, for my sack is full of toys and running over the brim." So just as the moon arose, they dashed out of the laughing valley, and across the plain and over the hills to the south. The air was sharp and frosty, and the starlight touched the snowflakes, and made them glitter like countless diamonds. The reindeer leapt onward with strong, steady bounds, and Claus's heart was so light and merry that he laughed and sang while the wind whistled past his ears. With a ho 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 and a ha 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 and a ho ho ha ha he, now away we go o'er the frozen snow and merry as we can be. Jack Frost heard him and came racing up with his nippers, but when he saw it was Claus, he laughed and turned away again. The mother owls heard him as he passed near a wood and stuck their heads out of hollow places in the tree trunks. But when they saw who it was, they whispered to the owlets nestling near them that it was only Santa Claus carrying toys to the children. It is strange how much those mother owls know. Claus stopped at some of the scattered farmhouses and climbed down the chimneys to leave presents for the babies. Soon after, he reached a village and worked merrily for an hour, distributing playthings among the sleeping little ones. Then away again he went, singing his joyous carol. Now away we go o'er the gleaming snow, while the deer run swift and free, for to girls and boys we carry the toys that will fill their hearts with glee. The deer liked the sound of his deep bass voice and kept time to the song, with their hoofbeats on the hard snow. But soon they stopped at another chimney, and Santa Claus, with sparkling eyes and a face brushed red by the wind, climbed down its smoky sides and left a present for every child the house contained. It was a merry, happy night. Swiftly the deer ran, and busily their driver worked to scatter his gifts among the sleeping children. But the sack was empty at last, and the sledge headed homeward. And now again the race with daybreak began. Glossie and Flossie had no mind to be rebuked a second time for tardiness, so they fled with a swiftness that enabled them to pass the gale on which the Frost King rode, and soon brought them to the Laughing Valley. It is true when Claus released his steeds from their harnesses, the eastern sky was streaked with grey. But Glossie and Flossie were deep in the forest before day fairly broke. Claus was so wearied with his night's work that he threw himself upon his bed and fell into a deep slumber. And while he slept, the Christmas sun appeared in the sky and shone upon hundreds of happy homes, where the sound of childish laughter proclaimed that Santa Claus had made them a visit. God bless him. It was his first Christmas Eve, and for hundreds of years since then, he has nobly fulfilled his mission to bring happiness to the hearts of little children. And I'm going to leave it there for tonight. If you want to pick up where we've left off and don't want to have to wait until next year, you can, as always, find the original on Project Gutenberg, at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Sweet Night and Friends by Kumiku. Check out more of their work on their website, which you'll find linked on the show notes. Good night and sweet dreams.